Hello dear students, once again welcome to your weekly current affairs session. We are currently in the first week of October where we are discussing the important current affairs that have happened from October 1st to October 7th. So when I'm saying these dates, both of these dates are included when it comes to these particular current affairs. Now, as we are discussing about it, as you know, there are two major sections in it. There is a prelims related part and there is a mains related part. And I hope you, with respect to whatever is the model that you are making notes in, when it comes to mains, I hope you're creating a one-page note for every mains topic that we have discussed over here. When it comes to prelims, I hope you are putting up these current affairs wherever I'm talking about the specific areas or the subject heads that it has to be put under. I hope you're jotting it down under those particular subject heads in a current affairs notebook. This is very essential. Each and every session of ours starts with this, I would call it like a cautionary note, because a lot of times students think just watching these sessions is more than enough. And I get a lot of messages asking me like, is this session more than enough? Now, the thing is that when we make these sessions, we try to include the major UPSC relevant current affairs. So you would not see us discussing something that is very generally newsworthy, but it might be of UPSC relevance, and hence we are discussing this. So when we discuss this, try to ensure that you jot it down into your current affairs notebook, because no current affair preparation is complete without having proper revision. Okay, so with that, a small cautionary note, let's start off with this week's current affairs. And here, the first set of prelims topics that we have, one of the first topics we have to discuss is about the future of the solar system. Now, you must be wondering, how is this even a current affair? The reason being that very recently, we have found we constantly are, when we do space travel, be the different space agencies, the constant lookout is for a planet or a group of planets centered around a star that kind of resembles our own solar system. So there's always a lookout for it, because why? We believe that maybe if similar conditions are emulated elsewhere, we might find life or so. So amongst these space travel, discoveries and space observatories that were happening, very recently, they have found in a much distant, galaxy, you have a planet and a star that's resembling very alike the relation that Earth and Sun has. Okay, so they have observed, what they have observed over there is, so right now we do have the sun, and then you have several planets moving around it, Earth being one of them. Now, those who've sat for the science and tech class, I've told you, the sun, at the end of the day, it's a star. So, like any other star which has a birth, a mature stage and the death of a star, even sun has that kind of a phase. Okay. So, sun right now, it is in its very young stage, but as the sun progresses through millions of years, what is going to happen to the sun is, at one stage, because I hope you've learned this in your science and tech classes, wherein all of this energy or this hot mass of gases and plasma that the sun is made of is primarily because at the core of the sun, you have a fusion process happening. What is fusion? You have smaller, lighter elements forming heavier elements. So you have hydrogens coming together forming helium, and helium again, because in that process when helium is created, helium again tries to fuse with the resultant area, and this is what keeps on burning the or giving energy to the burning of the sun. But at one stage, what is going to happen? This fusion process, because you need a certain amount of temperature, you need a certain amount of gases for this to keep on happening. and it's not constantly maintained. At a period of time over millions of years, this gas that is burning constantly or fusing constantly might get exhausted off. Once it gets exhausted off, there is nothing giving energy to the sun from its core. So what is going to happen? One of the first stages you would see is the sun, which is in its young child stage or the birth stage, which is there. At one stage, it is going to turn into a very large globe called as a red giant. Okay. Now, it's not just the sun. Any star which is having similar dimensions like that of the sun would also go through the same stages which is there. So this star, it becomes a red giant. Red giant in the sense that it'll be red in color. It'll have it from its yellowy glow. It'll be a red, brownish red in color, but it's going to be much larger in size. It's not that the sun is burning more and more. What has happened is, because there is some amount of loss of gases in the middle, the sun is not able to hold all of its core together. So the core constantly, normally it just keeps attracting all of these gases together. But if there is no energy in the center, what is going to happen? It's going to start spreading out. And this is what we observe as the red giant. And once this stage has happened, we know for sure in the next couple of million years, what's going to happen is this red giant, all of the gases will keep spreading apart, and slowly at the end of time, what will be left is a small mass which will have there will not be any kind of energy generating process over there. There will not be any luminosity over there. It will not be bright or anything. Maybe it will turn into something like a white dwarf. At that point, you know that this particular star is reaching towards its death. Okay, so based on the mass of the star, it will vary, but we are just talking about a sun-like star, what is going to happen to it. Now, this is what will happen to our sun also. So, eventually the sun is going to become a red giant, and then after a few thousands of millions of years, it's going to become into a white dwarf. Now, what we observed in our space observatory very recently is this exact thing. We saw a planet which has very similar dimensions and mass and structure like that of the Earth. And in a very sad state, this planet is actually moving around or revolving around a white dwarf. So obviously this white dwarf would have been previously what? It would have been the star or the crux or that center point on which that entire system was based on. But now that star has come to a end. So when we saw that, we had a direct prediction as to what would be our situation also. Because see, you have to understand the reason why life is able to exist in this manner on Earth has a lot to do with the fact that sun's energy reaches only that much to us. Still, we do get energy from the sun. There is heat from the sun, etc. But once that is done, we won't have similar conditions on the Earth, and this can lead to a not very ideal situation for life. Got it? So what we have observed is an Earth-like planet orbiting a white dwarf. The sun, which was roughly 4.5 billion years old, is destined, our sun is also destined to become a white dwarf. First, it will go through a red giant phase, and then it will move into a red, sometimes if the mass is very high, it's called as a red supergiant. Nevertheless, it will become a white dwarf. This specific observatory that we just had or we saw right now was almost about 4,200 light years away from our solar system. At this point, I just want to discuss a little bit more about the white dwarf, because again, a previous year question was asked in the same sense. White dwarf is the stellar core. What is stellar? Related to a star. Okay, so it's the core of the star left behind after a dying star has exhausted its nuclear fuel and expelled all of its outer layers to form a planetary nebula. So even when you look at a white dwarf, the temperatures of it will be it will be very cold also. So the white dwarfs cool over time, and it is predicted that eventually it will even lose that amount of light or luminosity it has, and eventually it will turn out into become even a black dwarf, not a black hole. That's a different scenario altogether. Black holes are formed when supermassive stars finally reach to the end of their life and so on. But in the case of our sun, the sun is not going to turn into a black hole because the mass of the sun is not equipped to form into a black hole as per theoretical physics that is there right now. Got it? So, nevertheless, in this case, what is going to happen? Now, this white dwarf eventually might become a black dwarf where there's absolutely no fuel or anything holding. So, you will not even see it in a clear manner. And this is one very important point to be noted. Currently, we have not made any discovery of black dwarfs. Now, I want you guys to think of why we have not yet seen a black dwarf. Don't say that, okay, the technology is not very vibrant or anything. That is not the reason why we have not yet observed a black dwarf. I want you to give a good thought into it, and you can maybe, you know my Telegram number and everything. So you can just text me on to that. Those who are watching it, in our daily portal, which is there. Others can just let me know. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can just let me know it in the comments as to why you think that still now the black dwarf discovery has not been made, and the probability of it is also quite less that that in the near time we might actually make a black dwarf discovery. So I just want you to think what the reason is and let me know about it. Now, moving on to the next current affair that I have to discuss. It's about Khur. Okay, before I go into that, first of all, I forgot to tell you this. Future of the solar system. Which section will you put it under? It'll be under your science and tech section. Okay, so don't forget to put it under your science and tech section. Moving forward, we have to discuss a little bit about Khur. Khur is again, it falls under your environment category. Falls under your environment category. So let's have a look at what is this about. Now, Khur is otherwise also called as the Indian wild ass. Those who have been practicing your previous year questions do know that this has come both as an option in several questions and as the answer also in certain questions regarding your Kutch and the grassland area, etc. Okay, so this species is quite important from our point of view. The Khur, otherwise known as the Indian wild ass. So as you can see over here, it's a species that's very similar to the domesticated donkey species which is there. And as you can observe over here, the reason why it is again in news right now is because here, as you can see, IUCN has already declared it as an endangered species. But to make things worse when it comes to this, there has been the constant hunting of this species to a point where very recently it was reported that this species in a particular state in India has maybe reached to a near extinction level kind of a threat. That means in that state, maybe you might not even find the Indian wild ass any further on. So that is the next topic that we will be discussing. But as of now, let's first have a look into what is Khur, what do we know about this, etc. So Khur, as you can see, otherwise known as the Indian wild ass, it's basically an animal which is having a herbivore diet. The habitat of it extended from southern India towards southern Pakistan, Afghanistan and southeast Iran. Okay, it earlier was in all of these areas, but right now it occurs only in India. So you cannot say it is just endemic to India or anything. What has happened is over the time the species has been hunted and used so much to a point where right now it is now there only in India. Okay, and if you look at these are basically animals which move in groups. Their stable groups actually consist of females and their young, while the males tend to be loners. Okay, so the groups are primarily of a group of female Indian wild asses and their young, but the ones that you see alone are the ones that are away from the group, and they are the stallions, which are basically having a very elusive kind of a life. This, along with the fact that IUCN has declared it as endangered, and obviously Indian Wildlife Protection Act has put it under Schedule 1 also. Now I have to talk about this particular event that has happened. So, on account of certain, and you don't have to know which state and what, and because you see Indian wild as in Gujarat, you see Indian wild as in Rajasthan, certain parts of Madhya Pradesh, in all of these areas, you do see Indian wild as. Now, what has happened is, very recently, it came into a point where in certain localities where Indian wild ass was seen previously, their numbers reduced to just a meager 2 or 1 in that level. Now, a reason why this has happened is not just because of hunting, that is one other part altogether, but the extremity of this happened because of these conditions. Very recently, there are two major diseases that constantly affects the Indian wild ass. One is something called as a viral African horse sickness, and the other one is another disease called as the surra. And these diseases can be quite fatal to these species. In the localities where the species was seen in India, it was observed that this disease was quite rampant and it took the lives of a lot of these animals. That is one thing. The second thing is, normally what happens is, now this is not a very new disease or anything. What happens normally is the fact that over the period of time, when an animal gets exposed to these kind of diseases, this animal's genetic adaptation, or you tend to become more resistant towards it naturally. And that happens why? Because there's a lot of breeding of these animals from different areas. Normally that should have happened. But in the case of the Indian wild ass, already the populations of it are quite low, and they are known to be, they don't travel to different areas and breed. They are known to breed in very small locales itself. So what has happened is, there's very less genetic diversity in this species also. So what happens is, only when you have a lot of genetic diversity is where you can be expected to have some kind of a, the survival of the fittest kind of a thing, where you can have, you can have crises in the form of diseases and everything, but then you overcome it. But in the case of the Indian wild ass, it's a double whammy, because why? On one hand, it does not have the genetic diversity because they keep breeding in very limited locales. They do not have a large range to which they travel. And added to that, this disease also came into being. So on the whole, what has happened is, this has taken the life of a lot of these animals. And this is the reason why, again, it is up for discussion. So I hope this entire thing is clear. Now moving on to the next topic that we have to discuss. Again, as I keep telling you in these different sessions, whenever we have any kind of tribes that we have to discuss, rather than just jotting it down, ideally if you want to jot it down, you can either put it under the miscellaneous section or the art and culture section, etc. But if you are in the nature of, learning things in a very visual manner, I would also suggest, whenever you get to know a tribe, create one map, just one map for all of the tribes that happen throughout the year in the news, and just mark it over there. Okay. The note part of it you can write separately, but to quickly revise, okay, Shompen tribes, where are they from? So where are they from? That is the first point that we have to talk about. This you can put it under your miscellaneous section or your art and culture section also. Now, what has happened over here is, Shompen tribes are a very primitive tribe that is seen in your Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands primarily have 5 to 6 major tribes that you see. And when you look at the tribes of Andaman and Nicobar, actually, if you are, you are from, I think, Anthro background and everything, or Anthro is your optional, you probably would be studying this, where if you observe the tribe gradient when it comes to your Andaman and Nicobar Islands, you do see so much evidences of how our entire Indian subcontinent has been forming. Why? Because in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, you do find tribes which are descendants of your African areas. You do find tribes which are descendant of your Australian areas. You do find tribes which are also descendant from your European, Central Asian kind of areas also. So this is a very diverse combination of these different groups. Out of all of this, we have the Shompen tribes. They are primarily hunter-gatherers, and they also practice a little bit of horticulture, pig rearing, etc. They primarily focus on the hunting, and their diet, their livelihood and everything focuses on the hunting of wild pigs, monkeys, monitor lizards, and sometimes even pythons. Okay, and they belong to a category called as the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, which is your PVTG. When I was reading about the Shompens, one thing that I felt we could discuss is their diet is very much related to a certain kind of a plant called as your pandanus. Okay, now its fruits resemble something like that of a pineapple, like a very woody pineapple sort of a thing. But this pandanus is actually considered to be a staple food of the Shompens. Again, in different contexts, these terms have come in different news articles over a period of time, not just in October first week. Okay, so I hope you're just keeping a note of it in case it comes about. Again, one other reason why we are discussing about, even previously we've done this, is because these tribes have been known to keep a very because they are kind of intimidated by this mainland processes, etc. They are known to keep a distance from the government and the administrative processes, etc. But in the very recent elections that have happened in Andaman and Nicobar Islands previously, when they were looking at the representation from different areas, they have found that the Shompens have come to vote in these elections. This is the reason why it made the news. Okay, one of the news that was there, but the rest of the points are what we can expect questions from. Okay, so I hope it is entirely clear. Seen in Andaman Nicobar Islands, hunter-gatherer tribes, PVTG tribes, main diet composed of your pandanus. Moving forward, we have to discuss a little bit about this. I would say there is a threat, and there is also another side to it that comes about, a topic called as greening in Antarctica. So obviously, it comes under your environment section. Okay. Now, what exactly is happening in this greening in Antarctica? See, we have observed that a large amount of areas which are there in your Antarctica are now very quickly, the ice is melting from these areas. Okay. Now, what happens when the ice melts? Let's have a look about it. So obviously, as we see it, you have snow-covered areas. Then you have different layers of the snow, and then underneath all of this, you have soil layers. And then you have rocks, bare rocks, etc. Maybe somewhere underneath all of this, you might even have spores that might have been there from extremely long periods of time. So now, over the period, what is happening is, it is seen that the Antarctic Peninsula is heating up 5 times faster than the global average. That means, if you look at this particular area over here, since 1950, this region alone has warmed by 3 degrees Celsius. You must be thinking, is that a big deal? Now you have to think this entire discussion about climate change is because even 1 degree Celsius will change our weather systems and climate systems in a very drastic manner. So here we are talking about Antarctica being heated up from 1950 to current days. It's heated up by almost 3 degrees Celsius. That means it's considered to be 5 times faster than the global average. And in previous times, like almost in 1986 period, the entire Antarctic Peninsula had vegetation. Vegetation means green plants, growth, not even trees. We are talking about small growth of moss, etc. There was only less than 1 square kilometer of vegetation in Antarctica. Right now, it has increased to almost 12 kilometers square in 2021. Okay, so on one hand, think if there is this ongoing, every time there is this discussion about climate change. So when it comes to Antarctica, people are quite double-minded on one aspect, where because see, what is happening? The ice is melting. Okay, ice is melting means obviously it will go into the oceans. The sea level will rise. Elsewhere, there is going to be a loss of vegetation because the sea level will rise. In some areas, it will flood the lands. You can have habitations. You can even have vegetations completely destroyed. When it comes to Antarctica's point of view, what is happening? This different layers of snow melt and there is water that is present over there. And when that water starts interacting with this bare rock which is underneath the soil, what is happening over there? That starts slowly breaking down. There is weathering of these rocks that happen. And this, my dear students, you all would have studied, when you studied environment, you would have studied primary succession, secondary succession, etc. This primary succession is happening right in front of our eyes right now, where the ice is melting and slowly the melted ice is actually leaching these different rocks over the period of time that has happened. And those minerals are aiding the small spores and everything that are there in the soil. And what you're seeing right now is the growth of moss and lichens in Antarctica. Okay, you're seeing the growth of moss and lichens in Antarctica, and over the period of time, because what is going to happen? Primary succession, after some time that will get replaced by small kinds of grass, some kind of annual shrubs, etc. Then it will change into perennial herbs. Gradually and eventually, we are looking at the greening of Antarctica. So what is in action over here? Primary succession. So I hope because see, this is one very good area where a current affair and a concept that you have learned in class can be brought in together. You can learn it together, and that is why I have taken that opportunity. I hope you've understood this topic in clear. Now let's move on to another topic that we have to discuss called as Caracal. Okay, Caracal again is an environment related topic. We have so many environment related topics this time. Last week and all, it was more of government schemes, I would say, but this week it's more of environment. So Caracal is this particular, it looks like a cat, fox. You have an intermixing of all of these species that it looks something like that over here. Again, Caracal has been in news because very recently in Gujarat, they have started a 10 crore conservation project for it. Okay. Now, I want you to understand, you might be thinking, okay, it's a conservation project. Is the species is it endangered? Is it critically endangered? And this is where the catch is. The species is listed as just least concern in IUCN. Okay, but that is because globally the species is of least concern. There are a good amount of populations of it. In India, the population of the species is quite less. Okay, so be it in your areas of Gujarat, your areas of MP, Maharashtra, etc. This is where these species are normally seen. But this number is quite less over here. This is the reason why, despite it being of least concern in IUCN, in our Wildlife Protection Act, we have put it under Schedule 1 itself. Because it's the numbers of the species are quite less when it comes to India. So this is basically a medium-sized wild cat species, which is primarily nocturnal in nature. I hope you are aware of what is nocturnal, and IUCN has listed it as of least concern. Under the Wildlife Protection Act, it is under Schedule 1, and in India, you do specifically see it under your Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, which is there in Rajasthan, and in the Kutch region of Gujarat. These are primarily the two areas where their population is in good numbers. So this is the reason why here they have also started a conservation project in Gujarat to ensure that this the species gets conserved in a good manner. Moving forward, we have to talk about VSHORAD. VSHORAD, as you can see, this falls under your science and tech section, primarily under your defense. Okay. So what exactly is your VSHORAD?